Whereas in the book, this was not the case, and she truly did. This was for real. And honestly, this was, I want to say it was a turning point in the book where she just went too far. And yet, honestly, the book had been already gotten pretty dark up until this point. But yeah, I mean, this was just so dark and disturbing. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about The War of the Roses by Warren Adler, published in 1981, and I'm comparing it with the movie directed by Danny Devito, which was published in 1989. And I have been wanting to cover this for a while, and it has been requested by Queen City History and M. Chantel. But what really spurred me to finally cover it is because of the remake that is coming out later this month. It is called The Roses, and I am very excited to see it. Once I watch it, I will make a video sharing my thoughts and how the remake compares with the original movie as well as the book. So yeah, I am pretty excited. I really liked the book and original movie, and so it has me all the more excited for the remake. And yeah, even though this book and movie are about two unlikable people, especially in the book, they are just even more horrible. I still really enjoyed it, and I would recommend both book and movie. And from here on out, I am just going to get into the details of the plot, so there will be spoilers going forward. So the basic premise is pretty simple because we have Barbara and her husband. His name is Oliver in the movie, Jonathan in the book. They have been married for nearly 20 years, and after he has a medical scare and she does not come to the hospital to see him, she admits to him that she did not go see him because she didn't care, and that she even hoped that he would die. In the book, she's like, I hoped that you would just die and it would be a clean break. And this realization makes her want to then get a divorce. In the movie, she tells him that she was driving to the hospital and she started to think that he might die. And then she started to feel scared because the thought of him dying made her happy. And so the fact that that made her happy scared her. And so in both, it's basically the same. And she is the one who asks for a divorce because she realizes that she doesn't love him anymore. And the movie tells the story chronologically, framed as Oliver's lawyer, Gavin, played by Danny DeVito, telling someone else the story of the roses. And we see throughout their marriage the many times that they have had these tiffs and how Oliver's behavior has chipped away at Barbara for her to arrive at the point where she wishes he had died in the hospital. And so with the movie, there is a slow buildup to this moment, and the audience isn't surprised when she has this revelation and asks for a divorce because we've seen the buildup throughout the movie. And also the part where she wants a divorce happens almost halfway in. So I was kind of surprised how long it took for us to even get to that point. Whereas in the book, we start out hearing how they met at an auction, and from this, we then cut to 18 years later, and they seem to have the picture-perfect family who has everything you could ever hope for, when suddenly there is the medical scare and she doesn't show up to the hospital, and she tells him she wants a divorce. And so in the book, you're almost just as blindsided as Jonathan is when this all happens. Like, you're not really blindsided because you know what book you're reading, but it does happen very quickly. And again, things were going great for the Rose family. So it is sort of out of nowhere, and you can understand why Jonathan is just in shock. Whereas in the movie, you're seeing the buildup. So you're like, we've seen why Barbara reaches this point more so in the movie. Also in the movie, we see that Barbara was obsessed with getting their home, so she had been leaving notes for the original owner for a year, and then once they do get the house, while Oliver was busy with work, she spent years cultivating this home, decorating and refinishing the house to be the beauty it is today. And so with this background, we can understand why she is so adamant that she should keep the house in the divorce. And Oliver may have given her the house in the divorce, except she uses a note that he had written when he thought he was about to die. In this note, he said, like, everything I am and everything I have is thanks to you, basically. And so she gives this to her lawyer to use against Oliver to show, like, I deserve everything I want because you yourself in writing said it's all thanks to me. And considering the circumstances in which he wrote this note to her, he feels like this is a very low blow. And because she went so far as to do this, he vows to never let her get the house, just out of spite. And he had been staying in a hotel, but after this, he moves back in because his lawyer tells him that they can still be considered separated as long as they live separate lives despite being under the same roof. And if he wants to keep her from getting the house for the judge to determine in his favor, he needs to be staying in the house to show how committed he is to getting the house. Whereas in the book, it was a little different because they bought this house together, they furnished it together, and they met at an antique auction. And so this becomes a key part of their marriage, is going to antique shows and auctions and estate sales. And so the house is filled with things they bought together. And they also worked on the house together. And so it was very much a joint effort. And so the house represents their marriage in many ways. And by the way, in the book, I did want to mention, so the auction where they meet, the item they're bidding on is different because in the book, they are bidding on these two Staffordshire figurines. And they are two men who are boxing, and they were supposed to be sold as a set, but the auctioneer doesn't know what he's doing. And so he sells them separately. And so Jonathan ends up buying one and Barbara ends up with the other. And then once they get married, they love to tell the story of how they met. And because these two guys are boxers, they say like, oh, like these two will do all the fighting for us. But then it's also interesting too how in both book and movie we see during this auction, neither one wants to back down, right? And in the book, the only reason Jonathan stops bidding is because he doesn't have any money left to bid with. But of course, this shows their determination, which will come into play with their battle over the house. So how their relationship began is also how it will end, because neither wants to give in. But in the book, Barbara wants the house and feels she deserves it because she's like, there is no way I can ever make as much money as Jonathan does because I gave up my career in order for him to be able to pursue his. And so she's like, I will never be able to afford a house like this, whereas he will. Down the road, he could buy another like this. And she also has a growing catering business, which was even a bigger thing in the book. And the kitchen is custom made to her needs. And also in order to be taken seriously amongst the elite whom she wants to host and cater for, the home and its location and the furnishings are all part of the product she is trying to sell. So she feels like she is entitled to the home for financial reasons, but also because she needs it in order to solidify her career as a caterer and a hostess. And Jonathan, initially, he had been willing to split the cost of the home 50-50 and just split everything 50-50 essentially. But when her lawyer tells his lawyer that she wants the whole house and everything in it, Jonathan thinks that that is unfair. And he is also just so in shock that this is even happening. And he also never even moved out of the house because he was like, this is my home. I shouldn't have to move. And then when he decides that Barbara doesn't deserve the whole home, this is when his lawyer tells him that he shouldn't move out. He should stay put. And that'll help the judge rule in his favor, perhaps, the fact that he never moved out to begin with. And so I do think in both book and movie, they provide good reasons why each of them want the house so badly. I think the movie may have done a better job as to why Oliver wanted it so bad, which was just out of spite because he was so hurt by Barbara. And yet that's also kind of how it is in the book too, right? Because he is so hurt. Not only does she want a divorce, but the fact that he feels she's being so ruthless and wanting all of it, he just can't believe this is happening and it feels so wrong. And so he's also kind of wanting to keep it out of spite in the book as well as him just not thinking it's fair. And in both, they keep stooping lower and lower as they try to do different things in order to get the other to finally get out of the house. And some of the things they do, between the book and movie, there's some that are the same, some that are different. And the original cut of this movie was like 3 hours. That's how much footage they had filmed. And so there are things that were done in the movie that we don't actually see. But yeah, there's a lot that they did to each other. And there are a few things that are worth talking about in detail. So in the movie, what starts them like really taking things too far is when Oliver accidentally drives over Barbara's cat and kills it. And so after this, she locks him in the sauna. However, she does come back down and let him out. And then later on, she's hosting a black tie dinner for her clients, and he interrupts it and makes a scene, which leads her to smash his vintage car with her giant truck. And then after spending a number of days trying to hurt each other in non-lethal ways, Barbara invites him to a dinner and she tells him, like, this has got to stop. Like, you just need to move out. We can't keep living like this. And he wants to reconnect and like wants to make amends. And so he tells her, we could still be together. Like, despite everything, I still love you. And neither of us has gone past the point of no return. Like, we can still fix this. And Barbara tells him, like, you don't seem to understand that I don't love you anymore. I don't want to be with you anymore. And she also tells him that she has gone past the point of no return because at this fancy dinner, she made her famous pate. And he says something about how great the pate is. And she tells him she used his dog, Benny, to make the pate. And this obviously outrages and disgusts Oliver. However, the movie then shows us Benny outside. So it turns out she was lying and she told him this just as a way to show that she means business and she wants to hurt him. She wants to push things past the point of no return because she wants this relationship to end. Whereas in the book, this was for real. She really did kill Benny. And honestly, this point in the book is when it, the book had already been pretty dark up until this point, but this felt like a turning point in the story in many ways. And it made me feel sick reading this section. This was just so dark and disturbing. Like, how demented a person has to be to not only kill the family pet, but then butcher it in a way where they are able to serve it up and feed it to someone unknowingly. Like, it honestly makes me feel physically sick because it's so disgusting. But in the book, we did see earlier how her dad, I think it was, killed some rabbits while hunting, and she is the one that skins them and guts them. And so we see that she has no hesitation in doing all it takes in order to make her pate. But yeah, so the fact that she did that to Benny in the book was just so disgusting and deranged. But anyway, to backtrack in the book as to how all of this starts. So in the book, the Christmas tree catches fire, which is shown in the movie too, because Jonathan forgot to change the lights. And so the circuit was messed up. And so she feels like he caused the fire. And while cleaning up the mess, Barbara is so annoyed at him that she poisons his orchids. And then later, Barbara is trying to entrap Jonathan, get him to have an affair and to be able to record it because she has a spy watching him. However, Jonathan finds out about this, and while the spy is driving out of their driveway when he's pulling out, the spy is who runs over their cat. However, of course, Barbara just feels like Jonathan is to blame for her cat's death regardless. And so in the book, she also locks him in the sauna, but she doesn't let him out. He has to force his way out on his own. And then at one point, she also spikes his wine with LSD. And by the way, in the book, in the movie, we see them, Jonathan drinking. But in the book, it's talked about even more about he's just constantly drunk once all of this starts. And we also read how one of the reasons he's drinking is because he wants to numb not only the pain, but he also wants to numb his sense of logic and decency because he knows that if he sobered up, he would be in horror at what they've done. And so as the story goes on, he just is drinking more and more and more. But then he ruins her fancy meal in the book that she is hosting by putting a diuretic in the dessert. After this, she destroys his prize Ferrari, she ruins some of his prize antiques, she tries to kill him by having a large armoire fall on him. And from here, they just turn the house into a death trap when she then invites him to a dinner where she then feeds him the pate. And so in the book, things just go much farther with how they are literally trying to kill each other, and they stoop even lower than they had in the movie. And they are both so disturbed in the book that it starts to feel like a horror book. In the last third of it, I would say, it feels like it suddenly has turned into a horror story. But I think for me, when in the book, his name is Jonathan. I think the point when he took things too far was when he sabotaged her fancy meal that she was hosting for all of her clients. Because for one, in the book, he sabotages her as she's preparing the meal and he makes it so all of the electronics turn on. And there's dangerous slicing devices flying through the air and she gets scratched up and cut and she could have died. But she's able to make it through that, and then she just prepares everything manually without having to use any of the appliances. And so the fact that that didn't discourage encourage her, and she still made the meal. And once the people show up, the meal is a success and everybody is so impressed. And it felt like she truly deserved that moment after getting through the previous day with how he tried to ruin it. And so the fact that he then puts a diuretic in the dessert and makes the people think that her food is the problem and she is a bad hostess because they all have explosive diarrhea, like that would... Obviously, she dies, but that would have ruined her career. And again, because she worked so hard for it, it felt like she deserved this moment, like to have a win, you know? And so the fact that he did that, it was much worse than what he does in the movie. Because in the movie, it's like, oh, her crazy husband showed up. Like if she had stayed level-headed, she could have spun that in a way that didn't make her look so bad. But yeah, in the book, I hope I'm describing this accurately, because when this happens in the book, it just felt so devastating and horrible. And it felt, again, like such a low blow on Jonathan's part. And then obviously when Barbara, her lowest point is what happens to Benny, which is far worse than feeding people a diuretic. So anyway, they both just do horrible, horrible things in the book. But then to move on to the ending. So in the book, they have 2 kids, by the way, in both book and movie. And in the book, the kids are away at camp. However, they have not heard from their parents for weeks. And so they are worried about them. And so they show up to the house. However, at this point, the house has booby traps all over the place, and it is a death trap just to step inside. And so the kids show up and they walk inside the house, and both of the parents freak out. And Barbara is yelling like, kids, get out. Like, Jonathan, you need to save them. Like, get out of this house. And so the kids leave, and Jonathan, he also like sees the humanity in Barbara and sees the woman he fell in love with, right? Who loves her children. And so seeing their children starts to bring some humanity out in both of them. But in this moment, as Barbara is like yelling for the kids to get out, there's a banister that Jonathan had loosened, and she falls. And so Jonathan goes to save her, and he uses the chandelier as a way to save her and like pulls her onto the chandelier. However, Barbara had been hacking at the beam that was holding the chandelier because she wanted it to drop on Jonathan. And so it's not in securely anymore, and then they both end up falling to their deaths. And once they hear the crash, the kids then come in and they see one of the boxing figurines that they had bought when they first met, the parents, and the kids pick it up and they're fighting over this figurine and they cause it to break. And so this ending just shows how the stubbornness and the greed and the selfishness of the parents has already transferred onto the kids. Whereas in the movie, the 2 of them are fighting when Barbara loses her balance and she uses the chandelier to save herself. However, she is now stuck in the chandelier. And so Oliver says he will save her even though she doesn't deserve it. But then he gets trapped on the chandelier as well. And so while they are sitting there trapped, their lawyer, or Oliver's lawyer, Gavin, and their housekeeper come by and they yell at them like to go get a ladder so that they can be saved. However, while the 2 are getting a ladder, the chandelier breaks because Barbara had loosened the bolt, and so it falls and they both die. And in the end of the movie, Oliver tells Barbara he has loved her through all of this, but Barbara doesn't say anything. I mean, I think she says, I know, but she doesn't reciprocate the love. And then while they are laying there dying, he puts a hand on her, but with her dying breath, she pushes his hand away, showing that while he still loved her through all of this, she had truly just moved on and no longer loved him. And while I understand why the movie chose to, the first 50 minutes, we're seeing their marriage chronologically and seeing the rising tension within Barbara and her unhappiness. And I get why the movie chose to do that, to give it more context as to why she wants a divorce. And yet at the same time, I also liked how in the book, it appears to just come out of nowhere. But we learned that it really wasn't out of nowhere as far as Barbara was concerned, because again, she had these building resentments that she wasn't expressing. And so Jonathan didn't even think anything was wrong due to her lack of communication. And she thinks about the choices she has made when she was younger as far as her marriage goes, and how she was so focused on how in love she was that she wasn't thinking logically. And she also, in the book in particular, she's focusing a lot on her resentment and dislike for the institution of marriage and the patriarchal structure of things, and how it was expected of her to give up her schooling and career so Jonathan could pursue his. And now she has all these regrets about that. And in the book, when she decides to leave school when she first married Jonathan, her mom actually doesn't like this idea. However, Barbara is like, oh, you don't understand. I just love Jonathan so much. And she uses her love for him to validate why she is making this choice. And then we read, why hadn't they, her parents, warned her that such emotions were fleeting? Nothing lasts except things. Her fingers traced the elaborate carving of the candelabrum. But she had less contempt for her mother for not pressing the point harder than she had for herself. She derided her stupid, utterly ignorant 19-year-old self. Love had tricked her. Love lies, she thought. And this sentiment about love and the beginnings of a relationship, it might seem bitter and jaded, and yet I like where she's coming from here, because early in a relationship, it feels, the love takes over everything. And sometimes it can lead a person to do things they later regret. Like basically, love can cause you to compromise who you are. And in the moment, it seems fine because you love them and you're so happy. But then down the road, you start to regret that choice and you start to feel like you've lost who you are, kind of a thing, right? And so then you get filled with resentments. And so, yeah, I almost wish like I had read a book like this when I was younger, just to remember like love is a powerful thing, but try to stay level-headed enough that you make choices you'll still be happy with down the road, when maybe it's not that love fades, because, love takes cultivation and it can grow stronger over time. But also in the beginning, you're not thinking as logically, whereas later on, you might still love the person, but now you're thinking more logically. And so you're seeing things more clearly as time goes on. So anyway, obviously she goes in a very bitter direction. And yet at the same time, I do like where she's coming from with some of these thoughts. And also in the book, we have Jonathan reflecting on what he feels he did wrong when he was younger. And he also feels like he provided too much for Barbara. And he basically starts to have a lot of sexist thoughts and just kind of dislikes women in general because of this, what's going on with Barbara. And the movie has this sentiment with them in some ways, like how Barbara is just so over the relationship entirely, whereas Oliver is still trying to hang on. And we see how she devoted her life to the home while he was busy building a career. But all of the bitterness is definitely far more pronounced in the book, especially as far as both people are concerned. And in both, they have a woman they hire to help with the kids and with around the house, but she is totally different from book to movie. So in the book, she is an attractive 20-year-old who has a major crush on Jonathan. And she is the one where so there's a night where Jonathan is drunk and the two of them kiss. And then later, Barbara suspects something is going on. So she purposefully leaves the house with the kids so Jonathan and Anne will be alone, hoping they will have sex. And she has a spy there to record them. However, this goes awry. And again, the spy kills the cat on accident. But Jonathan and Anne do have sex in this moment. However, after this, they send the kids to summer camp and Anne leaves, of course. However, she does stay in contact with the kids still. And once the kids haven't heard from the parents, they're telling her, we're so worried. Have you seen mom and dad? We haven't heard from them in so long. And Anne is lying to the kids, trying to make it seem like everything is fine, when really she hasn't heard from them either. And so she goes to see the house, to see them, and they don't answer the door, so she is able to get in the house through another way. And there's so many death traps all throughout the house, and so, her life is at risk just by being in there. However, she is able to make it back outside safely. And then she sees Jonathan looking out the window, and he is just like a haunting figure and a shell of who he once was. And it gives her the shivers, and she's like, I was in love with that man. He looks horrifying right now. And then later on, I think it's that same night, she calls up where the kids are at camp and they tell her oh, they've left. They're going to go to their house because they're worried about their parents. And Anne knows what a horror show the house is. And so she's like, oh, they cannot see that. That's not safe for them. And so she hurries and goes to the house. And then she shows up right at the end once the parents have died, and she sees the siblings fighting over the boxing figurine. Whereas in the movie, she is a middle-aged woman who has no romantic interest in Oliver whatsoever. She does show up in the end and sees what a mess the house has become. And she actually sees Oliver face to face in the house. And it's kind of funny because he throws something at her, but she ducks it. And he's like, oh, sorry, I thought you were Barbara. And he says it as if it's so normal for him to be throwing things at Barbara. And so I did like their actual interaction we got here. And she also is worried Barbara's dead. And so he calls up and he's like, honey, Susan wants to make sure you're okay. And so Barbara calls down being like, I'm better than ever. And so, yeah, I thought this was a great interaction in the movie. But yeah, she then later returns with Gavin, the lawyer, and the two of them are the ones who go look for a ladder, but ultimately they don't come back in time and she sees them die. And I liked this change for the most part. I felt like, having the au pair who was like in love with Jonathan, like it was fine, but basically I was fine that the movie totally changed this character and got rid of a lot of aspects with her. Also in the book, when we hear how she has such a crush on Jonathan, I thought like, oh, she's going to sleep with Jonathan and that is what is going to cause the divorce. And so I liked that actually wasn't the case and it wasn't an affair at all that had anything to do with the divorce. And it's not something that happens till later on. And Barbara, again, is like trying to entrap them in this situation, which works, sort of. But then to talk about their kids. So in the movie, they are older and honestly aren't around very much. Though there are two scenes with the son worth noting. So one, when the parents are fighting early on, we see him watching them with binoculars, which was just so sad. Like he's monitoring them from afar, like seeing what is happening with them. And then later, before going to camp, he is talking to Oliver and the son says like how he's pissed at him. And Oliver is then like, you want to hit me? Like, will that make you feel better? And the son instead comes in and gives him a hug. And yeah, we don't really get many scenes like this with the daughter as far as she is concerned, but I did really like these moments with the son and just showing their view on things and how this is impacting them. Whereas in the book, their youngest son is maybe like 13, and then their daughter, she just got a car, so she must be 16. And in the book, they have to live with their parents hating each other for months before they go to camp. Like, what a horrible, toxic environment. And also there is a point in the book when Jonathan is looking at his kids and he feels dislike for them because he is thinking how they are half Barbara. And at this point he despises Barbara. And so it makes him dislike his kids too, which was so sad. But then once summer comes, they force the kids to leave so that the two of them can just have it out once and for all. And so the good news is that the most violent stuff happens when the kids aren't there. But the bad news is that they literally stop thinking about the kids anymore in any way whatsoever. And the war between them is just all encompassing and that's all they care about. And at one point, one of them even mentions the kids and they both acknowledge like, oh, I haven't thought about them for weeks because they're just so self-absorbed in what is going on with the two of them. And it was just so detestable. And when the kids show up in the end, it is like a dose of reality for them. And they're like, oh, like the kids, like get out of here. Like you're going to die because this house is so dangerous. Like you need to leave. And so we see a bit of humanity come out in them in that moment and a bit of love for their children. But it was just too little too late. Also, by the way, in the book in particular, Jonathan is constantly drunk. Barbara is taking pills. Plus, they're also messing with each other's alcohol and pills. And so they're being drugged in ways that they aren't realizing. And so they just have so much going on that's messing with their sanity on top of the biggest thing of all, which is that they're just drunk on anger. And so, yeah, seeing how that affects the relationship with their children was just one of the saddest things. And in both book and movie, but especially the book, the house undergoes such a transformation throughout the course of this story. And the thing they had been fighting over ends up getting destroyed. And not only that, like it takes on a sinister vibe because it has been feeding off of their hate for one another. And they each use the house and the items they loved inside the house to get back at each other. And two quotes from the book in the end read, "It had been defiled and was masking ugly secrets. She was disgusted by its clean white facade, its arrogant, aristocratic air. Yet even that mute, worn figure of Jonathan conveyed less terror than the house itself. It had become alive, a chilling, bloodless monster. Their mutual hate had breathed life into it, and it had brutally punished her. She detested it now." And that's all from Anne's perspective, by the way. Also in the book, Jonathan refuses to pay the utilities at a certain point because he knows Barbara can't work without electricity. And this is Washington, D.C. in the summer. And so it gets stifling inside, plus dark because there's no light. And in the movie, we do see them in darkness and they're sweaty, but I don't recall that we ever hear that he stopped paying the bills out of spite. But yeah, the home that was once a source of pride and love becomes a thing of hate that is deadly just to be in. And in the book, it could be kind of heavy-handed at times with the message of how it's bad to let things become a priority over people and relationships. And again, seeing how bitter Barbara is, where she's like, love fades, but things last. And then, yeah, in the end here, like seeing how they die because of their greed and because of their desire for things and also their desire for status, right? Because that's what the house meant for Barbara, was it helped maintain her status and helped people continue to respect her and want her services. And so it's kind of heavy-handed in that message of not being so materialistic. And yet, I didn't mind how heavy-handed it was. Like, sometimes I'm fine with a message not being subtle. And yeah, I thought it worked in the book. But speaking of this message, one of the final lines in the book comes from Anne when she sees the two siblings fighting over the figurine, and she walks away, and we read, "For the first time, having few possessions made Anne feel pristine, virtuous. She would own nothing, she decided. And as for love, perhaps Barbara was right after all. Love lied." And there is also commentary being made on the upper class. And at times it felt like, in the book specifically, like Adler was trying to say, like, if you're rich, then that means you're greedy and don't care about other people. Because there's a point when Anne is knocking at the door trying to reach them and how the other houses around, like, don't care. And if anything, they're annoyed at the noise Anne is making. And we read, "The relationships rich people have with each other are so shallow," she thought. Every house was a private armored ship. And yet, I think the book kind of provides some balance with this message because Anne comes from a poorer family, but she herself doesn't like going home because her parents are both alcoholics and her home is not a happy place. And so we see, whether you're rich or poor, like nobody has the perfect family, perfect. And so I mean, I still think he was kind of, again, pushing the message of how it's bad to be materialistic and it's bad to have a lot of nice things, or at least it's bad to have those things and value them above people. But then also, again, I like that we do get some balance in seeing that it's not like Anne comes from a great family, and it's not like just because someone's poor doesn't mean they're more virtuous or better in some way. You know, people on all sides of the wealth spectrum have issues, right? But then it's also interesting that the law that allows a separated couple to still live under the same roof and yet still be viewed as being living separate, that was created because people who were poor couldn't afford two different living situations. And so the court made this rule where they could still live under the same roof, but as long as they were living separate lives, they would be viewed as separated. And so it's interesting how this law was created for the sake of people who were less wealthy. And yet we have this wealthy couple taking advantage of this as a way to appease their greed and spite and to get what they want. But then, as said, the movie is framed having Gavin, Oliver's lawyer and friend, telling this story to a prospective client. And in the end, once he's wrapped up the story of the roses, the movie returns to Gavin and he tells the guy who wants to file for divorce that after hearing this story, the guy can either continue with the proceedings or he can go home and try to remember why he fell in love in the first place. And the man then gets up and leaves, showing that after that story, he doesn't want to file for divorce and he is going to try to fix his marriage. And we also see that Gavin, who had been sleeping around a lot, is now a committed married man, showing that the awfulness of the roses actually made him want to be a better man, basically. And so while in both book and movie, both have the couple dying in the end, and yet the book is just so bitter and jaded all the way around and so horrible, whereas the movie tries to soften it up by having a more positive ending, despite the deaths of Barbara and Oliver. Also, by the way, Gavin, he is now married, and I kind of like to think that he married Susan, the housekeeper, because the two of them were together when they witnessed the death of Barbara and Oliver, and we see them like hugging on the stairs. And so I like to think that this moment drew them together, and then that bond turned into love, and they got married. So that's just me speculating, but that's what I want to think, because I think that's kind of sweet. But in the book, the lawyers are very different because, for one, they're not people either one were friends with. And also, both lawyers are just so scummy. And Jonathan's lawyer makes a point to tell him, you know, the reason I'm rich, I have like 2 homes and I go on vacations and whatever, is because of divorce. So he profits off of messy divorces, and the messier they are, the more money he's going to make, which allows him to live his lavish life. And we also get this from Barbara's lawyer, who is also kind of a scumbag, and he doesn't say it straight out, but she can sense that he's telling her, like, I'm fine with this being dragged out because, you know, I'm paid hourly. So the longer this goes on, the more money I'm making, which is fine by me. And so they are both very detestable people and greedy in their own way. And also in the book, once they send the kids to summer camp, the two lawyers also go on vacation, and then they're out of the picture for the rest of the book. And so I assume because DeVito directed the movie and he plays Gavin, that he may have requested his part to be larger, and also the fact that he's there in the climax. But that's just a guess of mine. And also, side note, the guy he is talking to who is wanting to file for divorce, he never says anything throughout the whole movie. And this guy went on to be the voice of Homer Simpson amongst, you know, a lot of the Simpsons characters. But yeah, anyway, he went on to become rich and famous from his voice. And yet in this movie, he just sits there and says nothing whatsoever. But before wrapping up, there are a few scenes from the movie I wanted to mention because I thought they were funny or that I liked them. So first of all, the scene. So when he thinks he's dying in the hospital, in the movie, he writes a note to his wife. And he keeps it and he takes it home and he tells her, like, oh, like, I wrote this note when I thought I was about to die. And he reads it to her, and he is being, you know, kind of dramatic about it. And he says how when he gets to the end, he's like, oh, I wasn't even able to sign it because of, you know, what was happening. But all she is able to say about this emotional moment, she's just like, they would have told me who wrote it. Because, like, the fact that he's like, oh, I wasn't able to sign it. And so she's like, I mean, I would have known who it was from because they would have told me. And so that being her response was just so hilarious. But then also there is a part unique to the movie where Barbara tries to seduce Gavin in order to get Oliver to agree to give her the house. However, Gavin doesn't fall for the seduction, but she puts her foot in his crotch because we saw that happen earlier when he had been over at their house for dinner. But he tells her, like, I haven't been into feet since 82, which again was a funny line. But then I also liked when Oliver is showing Gavin how they have divided the house. And Gavin is just like, you guys are crazy. And yet Oliver is thinking like, oh no, like this is good, like whatever. And so it's just showing Oliver's descent into madness and not seeing how far things have gone and just like, this is not normal. You're taking things too far already. And then also, not a funny part, but a line I really liked is that when Gavin is talking to Oliver about the divorce, Oliver is saying how, like, you know, talking about winning. And Gavin is like, in divorce, there is no winning. It's just different degrees of losing. And when it comes to book versus movie, again, this is a tough call for me, which, by the way, I was looking up some reviews and a lot of reviews said the old, like, you know, if you're looking for a scenario where the movie is better than the book, this is it. So a lot of people maybe didn't like this book, but I really enjoyed it. I liked how disturbing and how horrific it got. And then also it was just so fast paced, and it's relatively short, but I was able to finish this in one day because, again, things just were moving so quickly and things kept escalating, and I had never seen the movie before. And so I did not know how it was going to end. And I was so curious to see like how far they were going to go with this. And so, yeah, I ended up finishing this in one day because I just like had to know what would happen. But then I really enjoyed the movie as well. And it has a great balance of comedy, drama with a touch of horror, though not nearly as much as the book. Like, the movie has a lot of split diopter shots and it has a lot of camera work and it has moments that give it a horror vibe. But yeah, like to faithfully adapt this book, it would have to go like full on scary movie by the end. But yeah, the movie, it also gives it a more sentimental ending with Gavin and the guy he's talking to. And I thought this was fine too. I liked it. Like, I didn't need the movie to be quite as bitter as the book was. But I am glad that they kept them dying in the end, because apparently like the producers didn't like that ending and they wanted him to change the script and have them live. But Danny DeVito held firm, being like, no, like they have to die in the end. So good on him for sticking to that. But yeah, ultimately, I guess I will say the movie wins. I do like the change they made to the Anne/Susan character. And yeah, I really enjoyed both. but I guess ultimately I will say the movie wins, and I did really like watching this. I would highly recommend it. And honestly, I would recommend the book too, just because I did like it, but just be prepared for it to get pretty dark. And obviously, maybe I should have said this in the beginning, but the animal violence trigger warning, because again, when you find out what happens to Benny, it was so disgusting. So anyway, just be aware of that going into the book, that both of the animals die. Also, I wanted to mention here at the end, the scene with Benny, the dog, and the pate, that was reminding me of the episode of It's Always Sunny. Mac and Dennis moved to the suburbs because something similar happens to their dog in that episode. And that episode is so dark, and it is hilarious, but I've always thought the scene with the dog was a bit too disturbing, and maybe they took it a bit too far for my taste. And so I was thinking about that, and I was like, oh, Sunny must have been inspired in part by the War of the Roses for a lot of aspects of that episode. And it wasn't until I was editing that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Danny Devito is one of the characters in It's Always Sunny, and he directed War of the Roses and was in it. And so, yeah, I feel like they were definitely referencing War of the Roses in that episode. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that here at the end. So comment down below if you're a fan of It's Always Sunny. I guess that wraps it up for my book versus movie for the War of the Roses. Again, stay tuned for my video on the Roses that will be out probably like a week after the movie comes out. So again, I'm very excited for that. The cast looks great. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, comment your thoughts down below, and I will see you next time. Bye.